Welcome to the Strength Culture Podcast.
I hear him chat to the noise, move too quick, can't stop for the talking. I hear him chat with the boys, not so tough, but must keep caution.
All right, guys, welcome to the Strength Culture Podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode. I have Ricky Stanzi. Did I say that correctly? Ricky Stanzi? Did. Awesome. Collegiate and NFL quarterback. Played 4 years in the NFL. He's known as the professor in the GOATA movement system. So I just want to say welcome, Ricky.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it. It's GOATA.
GOATA. Sorry. See, I already messed it up. That's how much I know about you.
We've had that before.
Now we know. GOATA. All right. So, Ricky, please, how about you just give a brief introduction of yourself, who you are, if you kind of want to run through your athletic history, credentials, whatever you want to call it. Why don't you give the people kind of your own rundown of yourself?
Yeah. So, like Jeff said, played college football. That's kind of where this thing starts. Played college football at Iowa, played quarterback, was fortunate enough to get drafted into the NFL by the Kansas City Chiefs. That was 2011 draft class. So from there is really where my movement journey kind of started. And it started as a quest to just kind of fix myself, right? It was really just something's missing in my throwing motion. Something doesn't feel right. I need to kind of figure it out. I know I'm moving to the next level and it's going to be much more difficult at this level. And so I needed to kind of clean up my mechanics. So at that point I had gone to Tom Martinez, who has since passed. He's a legend. He worked with Tom Brady since Tom was 12. And so that was really my first introduction to sort of trying to break down mechanics, right? Try to look at movement with a fine-tooth comb. And he started talking planes of motion and all these different things and kind of got my mind stirring a little bit. I was very inconsistent throughout the first 3 years of my career. And that was really what kept me down second, third string. Spent 2 years at Kansas City, got cut going into that third year, then ended up in Jacksonville, there for a year and a half, got cut. I was on the street, and this was like 2014. So 2014, 2015 is when I really kind of go full steam at this thing. Because at that point, it's like, dude, I'm about to get out. I'm about to be kicked out of the league. Like everybody's 3 years and then you're gone. And I'm like trying to hang on. And I got a fourth year basically because me and coordinator were buddies, and somebody got cut and they needed a practice squad guy. And it just so worked out that I was available. So really 2014, 2015 is when I started diving into this movement thing. First book I really take a deep dive on is Supple Leopard with Kelly Starrett. And I had come from that world, like since 8th grade, I had been training in the 1-rep max system, the Olympic lifts, triple flexion extension, brace the core. That had been everything that I had known, right? And so up until that point, Starrett was kind of talking about the same stuff. He was adding this concept of torque, played around with it for a while, kind of looked at some of the more of the Western arts of, what you consider gymnastics and strict strength and a little bit of Pilates. And then I kind of went over into the Eastern world and was looking at yoga and looking at martial arts. And really just unknowingly, I was observing, as we all are, just looking at things, trying to find something objectively that would really just help keep me on a roster, help me throw the ball better, give me the confidence that I felt I was lacking. Obviously didn't work, right? So I'm still sitting on the street, bounced around up in Canada for a year and a half, which was a total blast. Amazing organization, Calgary Stampeders, amazing league, tons of great athletes, totally overlooked. I would recommend people checking out the CFL. There's a lot of great talent there. And then I kind of, finally settled back home in Cleveland with my wife and my kids. And that was when I was like, all right, I want to teach movement. I want to, take what I've learned and kind of, at the very least, help the generation behind me, specifically quarterbacks, people that I can maybe affect change in their lifestyle and how they view movement. And then there was really 2 books that started me in this path where I was like, wait, something's not right here. The first one was Muscles and Meridians. And that came from looking at Eastern art. And I just one night came upon this Amazon tab, and it led me to Muscles and Meridians by Philip Beach. And that book led me to Spinal Engine. And then Spinal Engine led me to looking around Instagram, and there was really 2 people that were mentioning this thing. One of them being, Jose Bosch, Coach Gill. And after following them for a little bit, and kind of experimenting on my own, and I had done another cert, did the FRC cert. It was playing around with concepts and I couldn't fix myself. And then Gilly and I started talking, and I started picking Gilly's brain and trying to understand what he was really saying. And that's when it kind of came back to the slow motion video, which was a skill set that I had been practicing since 9th, 10th grade as a quarterback. You watch video. That's what you do. You break down video in slow motion to see it and understand the concept. And then you go out and you practice what you're going to work on, see, feel. So this really rang true to me. And Gilly was talking about these ACL shreds, the Achilles shreds, right? How they happen. And so he kind of put the challenge on to me, which we do with other people. We say, go find me the inside ankle bone high shred. Go find it. And so I started looking at the shreds. I started watching the same pattern, inside ankle bone low, over and over and over again. Started watching the GOATAs move through space. And it just, all these sort of red dots that I had collected over those 10 years. And I'd put them up. I'm like, okay, this seems important. This seems important. It was really this slow motion video that made it all tie together. And I was like, oh, well, this explains it, and once I had my first assessment where I put down the camera and I was scared to do it, I'm like, I'm going to go watch myself run. And I watched myself run. And I'll tell you what, everything made sense at that moment. I was like, well, this explains why that out route didn't feel like it should. This explains why the go route didn't have any juice. This explains why I was stuck on the, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I was trying to find, oh, this explains why my left hip's burning up, why my back keeps exploding. And I keep having back spasms since 10th grade, why my ankle. So everything got just like this. It all made sense because the slow motion video was there for me to verify. And so since then, it's really just been me just help build this system, help get that message out there, help try to show evidence to explain what we're saying. And then in this amazing world of social media, we get to meet great people and have these conversations. And it's kind of like, it's, double-edged sword. It's tough to explain everything in one post. And these things really need formats like this, where you have an hour or two to really hash it out. And Gilly and I and a couple other coaches just got back from visiting Chris Como and Nota Begay and talking with the golf community. And we had 4 hours there to kind of hash through this system. And so that's where I'm currently at, is really just trying to get the information out there, show the evidence, and really tell people, hey, listen, I'm a 2.0 interdepartmental study student from Iowa. Okay. I'm just telling people they should go look at the evidence for themselves. And that's really the main thing, is we want people to see it. We want people to see it, then feel it, and then think logically and use your common sense and trust your eye. Don't see something and then turn over your shoulder waiting for a moral authority figure to say, yes, that's okay, you can do that now. We've kind of got to take this on our own, and social media gives us that opportunity. We can now watch more video than we've ever been able to watch. Everybody's got a supercomputer in their hands. They can scrape it. They can watch the video in slow motion. We can have chats like this about it. So it's an interesting time, and I'm very fortunate and very blessed to be in the position that I'm in.
No, that's great. I mean, I've been following you and some of the guys from the GOATA movement system for a couple of years now. I believe it's been a couple of years. It's been a while. Yeah. So something like that. And I've kind of watched you guys evolve through Instagram and kind of make some headway into the, I don't even know what you want to call it, fitness space, training space, professional sports space, kind of all of it, right? The industry, exactly. The industry with quotations.
With quotations, right.
Yeah. So let's take this back to the beginning. I mean, already you have a pretty successful track record. I mean, not a lot of guys, especially quarterbacks, make it to collegiate football at a high level. It's not like you just played for some, and even if you're playing for a Division II team or something, that's still impressive. Right. Not a lot of people. Right. You played D1, you played for Iowa, correct?
Yes.
So University of Iowa?
Mm-hmm.
4 years, drafted by the Chiefs. I mean, that's impressive already in its own right. Regardless, you made it to the league. Not a lot of guys can say that, especially compared to the amount of guys that are trying to go. But what I find interesting already is you already are kind of thinking outside the box, it seems. I mean, you talked about kind of your transition and looking outward to, different, I guess you could say different modalities outside of your more traditional football training, right? I have a little experience with some football players, and it is very hard to break them from the traditional football training that follows them essentially from middle school, high school. Especially in terms of, well, I'm sure we'll get more into this in a little bit, but Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting being the primary modalities to strengthen and train as a football player. And you're already going well beyond that, regardless of whether you found it to be helpful or not. I mean, you've, yoga, Eastern martial arts, gymnastics. I mean, this is not, I would not say it's normal for most football players at any level to kind of even make that
I was the
jump.
weird guy in the locker room, Jeff. I was the weird dude that asked the dudes in Canada. That was at like my peak weirdness of like trying everything. Would only sit on the ground, was into like the Ido Portal flow stuff.
Okay.
Really got in. What had sort of moved me into that space was, to be honest, the weights were killing me. Like I was wrecked. I was very WOTA when I finally figured it out. I was very WOTA once I actually watched my tape, but I wanted the Olympic to work. Like I told you, I love Supple Up. I read the book. I thought it was the truth. And I'm 2015. I'm on the streets, 2014, 2015, working, trying to get back in the league, sitting on the couch, but I'm helping out at a high school, and I'm in their weight room with their coach, and I'm part of the problem. I'm one of the guys that's trying to teach them the Olympic lifting. And I remember sitting there, I'm like, why is it so hard to teach Olympic lifting? Like, why is it so difficult to teach these people? Well, it turns out it's because they're moving backwards. Like you're literally teaching the body the exact opposite of the innate system, which is move forward. And so I'm trying to get Olympic lifting to work for me. I'd spent my whole life doing it. I buy a pair of kettlebells. I'm trying to do kettlebells work. What really stopped me from the weights was my body could not handle it anymore. Like my left shoulder, I'd gotten in a car crash. And so my left column was just all compromised. My hip was burning up. I'd go do a workout. The next day I wake up and I'm like, okay, I can't do this anymore. So I started to search for some more, like mobility type modalities, which led me into yoga and which led me into Pilates and some of these martial arts, which kind of was part of why I took the FRC cert. I was in that world. I'm like, I know mobility is important. I know supplements is important. But what's the common denominator here? So yeah, I was searching, and I'm telling you, it was objective because I was like, I'm just trying to stay on a roster. This is for my own health here, my own well-being, try to stay on a roster. So I was open and willing to look at anything that was out there. And that's what took me all across the globe, really, and all these different, look at my book collection. It's wild and it's great because it was fun to do that and go through that process. And part of the process is to help the people behind you kind of have a little shortcut, right? You can kind of speed people up because you took 10 years to look for it. And now I'm looking at like high school kids and I'm like, listen, Mr. So-and-so, just do this with your kid. Trust me. I did it. I did the other stuff. It didn't work. Don't go there. And so it's really cool now to be able to stop kids from wrecking themselves early on. And so that they don't have to throw their back out like I did in high school, and they can go and they can have a healthy career wherever they end up. It doesn't matter. The point is they get to stay healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you bring up too, because I've trained younger athletes, high school, middle school, et cetera. And they're actually the easy ones to convince, right? It's the parents that are the hard ones to kind of like, no, look, I understand that your guys have been doing it this way, or your coach says to do it this way, or your high school, whatever strength coach says to do it this way. Yes. And, two situations. One, kids can't afford, generally, particularly in the athletic world, a lot of the kids that excel at sports can't necessarily afford like this high-end kind of training. But I also kind of find that as like a good thing, right? And I've actually talked about this before, whereas a lot of these kids don't get wrecked by this, they're not all, but some kids don't get wrecked by this kind of high-end training that is more accessible to, families that come from money or things like that. And these trainers that, all these methods and whatnot, but it's the parents that are the tough ones to convince more so than the kids. I have found, I think that's a really good point for people to kind of take away, because if you're a parent listening, a lot of times you're the wall, right? That kind of sits between your, like, I hate to break it to you, but you're kind of the wall that sits between your child's success, between your child and his success, especially in athletics. So you've gone through, you have actually had your hands in more than I thought. You've done it all. you have done it all. You've touched it all. If there's a training system out there, it sounds like you have been through it. And then you mentioned a couple books that you found, and maybe you can, because this seems to be kind of one of the major transition points for you in terms of this is what happened before you found GOATA and Coach Gill. Mm-hmm. And that's Muscles and Meridians and Spinal Engine. Yeah. So if you just want to briefly kind of discuss what is it about those books that kind of turned the light switch on for you, so to speak, or kind of changed the direction of your thinking, which eventually led you into finding Coach Gill and the GOATA system. What is it about those books necessarily?
Okay, so Muscles and Meridians, it's a great book, and it's got a lot of cadaver science in it. It's a deep dive, but the beauty from the book is to take away this, and this is what Philip says in here, and I've quoted this multiple times, and we've talked about this, and it really comes back to floor rest, right? So what he was saying is that movement and rest are flip sides of the same coin. And so these resting postures that are supposed to be taking place on the ground are going to keep us tuned for the movement that follows, right? And so when you take a step back and you look at our world now, we're sitting in the chair, and everybody knows that the chair is bad, right? Everybody instinctively knows that. We've seen it kind of play out long enough here. It's had enough time for us to see the repercussions and the collateral damage from it. And then you see what our solution was to the chair was standing desk. And I'm like, oh, that ain't it. The answer's on the floor. And so the Muscles and Meridians book was fascinating to me because my whole thing was like, and my wife and I would talk about this. I'm like, you shouldn't have to work out. Like you should be able, just like the hunter gatherers don't work out. The other animals don't work out. They don't siphon some time in the day to go exercise. Like the day is the exercise. The lifestyle is the exercise. And so this movement rest cycle entered into my brain. And I was like, man, this, and he said it in there, and I've quoted this a few times recently, disturbingly simple. He kept saying that, like, dude, this is disturbingly simple. And it's inside of this complex book that he's saying it's disturbingly simple. And another part of that book that was interesting was this idea of a gearbox inside the spine. And so he proposed this gearbox theory where he was like, dude, flexion is reverse, extension is drive. And he was talking about how the spine behaves like a gearbox. And that was another thing where I was like, dude, maybe there's like a higher design here. Maybe there's like a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. And that led right into Spinal Engine. And then it took me right back over around the corner to Gilly. And I was like, oh, there is a way to move forward through space. There is a way to move backwards through space. And so it's this forward reverse gearbox that, you know, makes us who we are. We drive force forward, but we also have the ability to lift, pick something up and move something in reverse, right? So our default is to move forward, and that forward innate pattern is kept in tune by resting on the ground. So the movement is inside ankle bone high. And anybody that's followed us has seen us talk about IABH, that's inside ankle bone high. And what we're saying is essentially the arch of the foot, you maintain it when you land. The arch of your foot is a half dome. So it's gonna slope down to the outside edge of the foot. We are saying that the pivot point for human movement, and let's backtrack a second, pivot point meaning I'm putting something in the ground that I'm going to move energy around. So the foot behaves like a pivot point. It's a half dome structure. And so it's going to slope down to the outside corner. So the second metatarsal all the way back around that outside of the foot to the cuboid bone, that's what we're going to use as our stability, our pivot point that we're going to stick in the ground. And then we're going to take that ankle engine that behaves like a gyroscope, and we're going to turn it back down and out. That's going to load the bow. Thigh bone's doing it, spine's doing it, bicep bone's doing it. All these engines are loaded up. And then we're going to stay on that pivot point as we move that ankle gyroscope up, around, and in around the corner. And so this innate pattern of down, back out, up, around, in, down, back out, up, around, in, this loading the column, loading the side of the body, building pressure inside that column, and then releasing pressure. That's it. That's the step, the forward locomotion pattern. That pattern stays tuned when I rest on the ground. I'm sitting in Seiza right now, so anybody watching can see a Japanese sitting posture where you're sitting on your shins. And this is all inside ankle bone high. So if you look at that pivot point that I talked about, right, you look at the second metatarsal all the way through to the cuboid bone, and you picture I'm on the bottom of that pivot point right now. And there's my shin bone turning out 22.5, and then it turns in a full 45 degrees after I've set the bow. There's my corner. Well, that upside down inside ankle bone high is simply me taking the foot and flipping it upside down like this. And so we see this resting posture with the indigenous, the babies, the toddlers. Crisscross. You go into crisscross. What's that? Upside down inside ankle bone high. You get into cowboy posture, which is basically, if you can't see me, I'm in one leg's in a squat shape, the other leg is in the Seiza shape, sitting on my shin. So this is all upside down inside ankle bone high. And what's fascinating is that the nervous system is now accessing, you're in the parasympathetic state. So you're resting and digesting as you're keeping the movement that will follow tuned up. And this is how the hunter-gatherer doesn't get hurt. They're never feeding inside ankle bone low into the nervous system. They're never sitting in a chair. Whether they move as much as we do or rest as much as we do, it doesn't matter. When they rest on the floor. When they move inside ankle bone high. And the inputs during the day are forward, forward, forward. Walk, run, throw, swing, strike is what I'm designed to do, because that's how I go out and I hunt and I gather. So the floor rest was really, to get back, I kind of went on tangent, which I do all the time, but that is really what caught me. The natural world, how this should happen naturally, resting on the floor, man, that makes sense. Let's keep looking at this. And I'm like, the answer's got to be in nature. And then Gilly starts talking nature, and I was like, okay, indigenous people, let's watch them move in slow motion. Had to see it one time, and you're like, dude, there's the bow in the corner. It makes sense now. Everything's coming around the corner. The hurricane, the energy's coming around the corner. The tornado, the freaking swell in the ocean, the earth, everything's moving around the corner. And then we're teaching this straight line stuff in the body, and it doesn't even play out that way, even if you try. You have to pivot. You have to use the foot as a pivot point. And the locomotive pivot point is the outside corner of the foot. The lifting pivot point is the inside corner of the foot.
Yeah, there's a lot you covered there. And so I want to kind of break down sections of that. Let's start with the last thing you said. One thing that a lot of people do not realize, even when you're lifting and you're looking at things very sagittally, meaning forward, backward, side to side, there's still an immense amount of rotation occurring in all of your major joints, regardless of whether you try to stop it or not. And usually when you do try to stop it, problems arise. And even, systems aside, even if you're looking at lifting, a lot of issues that come from lifting come from the simple fact that your joints do not rotate well, regardless of whether you're going forward or going backward. And that's one of the biggest things that when I saw your guys' work, I was like, man, like this is rotation. This is everything the human body needs, from the hips, from the shoulders, from the spine, from the ankles, even, knees, even your knees rotate, your tibia, all these things rotate. And you guys are teaching rotation to athletes in a world of anti-rotation, which look, if you look at it from a common sense standpoint, it doesn't even make sense. The fact that you would try to stop people from rotating when they move, like it just doesn't make sense from the most basic level. You can throw all the science and the research and all the stuff out there that you want to throw out there. And look, if you want to lift weights, lift weights. I don't think anyone here is telling you not to lift weights, but you have to understand that there's going to be probably a cost. And a lot of that comes from two things. One, the way things are taught, because I feel like things, even within weightlifting and strength training, if that's something that you want to do, things are taught horribly. But rotation, and especially driving from the hip. And one of the biggest things that I saw when you look at your stuff, look, people kind of get lost. And I've talked about this, and I know you guys talk about this, is people want to talk research. Well, this is what the literature says. This is what the research says, or I can't do this if it's not backed by the literature and the research and yada, yada, yada. But the way that you guys use rotation of the hip and the ankle and that whole, what you guys call the column, as the source of changing of direction, as well as moving forward, because that's one of the big things that I saw when you guys posted. It's when you see the evidence, it's hard to go, no, you see it. And hopefully if you're a sane individual, and, if you get offended by that, I apologize. But look, if you're a sane individual and you see that video, it makes you stop and go, look, there's a lot of sense to this. You see like you said, you play the tapes, you see the injuries occur, and there is a common denominator there. And if you're sitting in a court of law and you present this evidence to me, and I'm a member of the jury, and I have to make a decision today, and it's life or death, somebody's life is on the line here, the video evidence is hard to reject. It's hard to deny. You know, with you, you don't need much else behind it. You see it, right? And I think people discount the aesthetic nature too of the human being, right? It just looks good. And when you see it and you go, wow,
yeah,
that looks really good. And then you see the opposite and you go, wow, that does look a little clumsy, a little sloppy. You could see why that injury occurred that way. And that was the first thing that kind of got me going, okay, because I as well, even being in the lifting world, one of the things that I didn't get exposed to until FRC, so I'll give FRC a lot of credit in this, right, was the emphasis on internal rotation. And I was a baseball player, so rotation was kind of important, but no one ever really taught it, right? I was also fortunate that as a baseball player, I didn't get introduced to weight training. Fortunately, when I played, it wasn't so much part of the culture. It's even
now it's kind of making its way.
It's making its way into the culture. Into baseball. Yeah. For a long time, baseball was kind of the last sport. They're like, oh, we don't need strength training, you know, just play baseball.
Like baseball and boxing. It was like baseball and boxing. It's like, dude, just play the game. You're rotational, right? You got to be able to turn. So they never
100%.
Lifting just didn't get in there.
Yeah, 100%. But now it's, you know, say what you will about it, it's definitely making its way in.
Oh, yeah.
But what I saw is you guys kind of pieced it all together from top to bottom and from bottom to top, really, was coming from the foot up the ankle, up the shin bone, to the knee, to the femur, to the hip, to the spine, to the shoulder. You connected the dots all the way up. And like I said, for anyone who's listening, I encourage you to watch some of the demonstration that Ricky just gave, because he gives you a really good demonstration. If not, just go to his Instagram. It's at Red Pill Rick, or any of the GOATA movement guys, because the video evidence is there for you to take a look at yourself. But it's hard to deny, no matter how dogmatic and attached to the old ways, as we'll call it, that you want to be. It's hard to go, nah, they don't know what they're talking about, or nah, they don't, they're just spewing a bunch of BS. That you see it and it's like a black swan, right? It's like, it exists. It's there.
Yep.
Do you want to confront it, or do you not want to confront it? So let's talk about, now that we got a lot of the details kind of in there, you meet Coach Gill. He takes you through your own assessment. What's that like, right? Because as a professional athlete, who, to your credit, made it to the league, you made it to the league.
Yeah.
It's hard, I can imagine, for somebody who makes it to that level to say, there's something wrong with me. You know what I mean? Like,
not good.
It takes a unique individual in many ways to stop and say, okay, even though I've made it this far, which is going to be 99% farther than most, there's still something to fix here. And you found Coach Gill. What was it about Coach Gill specifically? Because I'll say this, and of course, everything I say, I put it in the context of the way people receive it. It's not necessarily my own opinion, but he comes off kind of harsh or crass, right? So it's hard for people to listen sometimes when people come off that way, but you took it, right? Because I feel like a lot of athletes are that way too. Like, sometimes you have to coddle them and pamper them and kind of give things to them in a way that they feel like they're not being offended or whatever. But what was your experience meeting Coach Gill? Because I think that's going to give a lot of insight into some people who might come across him and go, I mean, he's a little aggressive or whatever you want to call it. But you built a relationship with this guy and you trusted him. I mean, you ran the gamut of quote unquote professionals or titans in the industry and all their methods. And you find this guy who at this time was probably really, in the terms of the industry, a nobody. Like, no one heard of this guy. No one knew who he was. Right. Now they do, but they didn't then. So what was it then that kind of got, other than the video evidence, which you talked about, what got your trust? What was it about Coach Gill specifically that you said, okay, I'm in on this thing?
Yeah, I think the beauty of Coach Gill is really the backstory to how he, observed or discovered this pattern that's always been there. Gilly was somebody, and this is important for people to understand, is Gilly's somebody who has 4 or 5 small businesses. He did not need to take GOATA to the world. Let me be very, very, very clear about that. Gilly had found GOATA back in like 2010 when the iPad first came out, and he was able to then watch slow motion for himself. And there's tons of documentaries on Nat Geo and all these other, nature channels that they're filming the indigenous. So that was where Gilly started this whole thing. Was it used to be called primal wisdom theory, because it originated with, how does the body travel through space for a lifetime and never get hurt for no apparent reason? Well, we got to look at the most durable humans. Well, the most durable humans are the indigenous people. So let's go watch the indigenous people move with these new slow motion cameras that we have. And so Gilly starts there, but he started there because he was wrecked. He's got 3 levels of degenerative disc in his lumbar back. So he was wrecked, and he had success with his small businesses. So he kind of gave himself some time and some freedom to go search. And that was when he kind of started dabbling in the corrective exercise world. And he started to he did a Goskew method. He looked at supple leopard or Starrett stuff. He was working with the ground guys that were doing like the animal flow stuff. And he was, he talked with, the back chain dominant people, Gene Couch and Esler Goclay, or some of the people, and Kathleen Porter, that were also observing the indigenous. So he had different pieces, and the slow motion really put it together for him. And the thing that I love about Gilly is that it's no nonsense. Like it's as true as it gets, because he didn't have to even do it. Like he did this out of the really the sort of that lineage of like, I don't want people that are coming up behind me to get wrecked like I got wrecked. Like if this system can save one kid from what, this is Gilly saying, if this system can save one kid from what he had to go through, then it was worth it. And so that right there kind of paints you a picture of like who this guy Gil is, like what he's trying to do. He's trying to keep people from getting wrecked. And if you've watched 20 years of this, like you said, the slow motion's like undeniable. And it really is. He's watched this for 20 years. So he's been battling way longer than someone like me or Cody or Gary has, because he's been at this. He's got his own friends, some of his own family that still won't trust him and listen to him, because we're so just kind of hardwired to what we believe and what we think and what we trust, that you see how hard it is to break people from their preconceived notions. And for Gilly, it was really just, I was looking for that truth. And so I was so open to someone just being like, dude, that's a bad foot. That's a bad ankle. That's a bad hip. And then, like I said, once I'm watching myself run on tape and I'm like, oh, well, that explains why my back keeps imploding. I've got no foot and ankle structure on the right side. That's where my injury was. That's where my hardware is. I can see why my foot's slouched like that. Oh, my left side is the side I'm living on, and I'm beating the crap out of it because it barely opens and it barely closes at all. But I'm just living over there because my right side's weak. And then my left hip burns up and I keep pulling my groin. So like everything that was like hurting in my body that I couldn't get answers to, Gilly answered. And I had been looking for 10 years for those answers. So once the answers came there, I was like, finally, dude, finally, I've got some direction. I've got a place that I can now move towards. I've got a status that I'm at, WOTA, and I can start moving myself into BOTA, start to blend the action, and then finally get over that hump where I'm always inside ankle bone high. And for me, I was done playing. So for me, Jeff, I was just like, I don't want a knee replacement. I don't want a hip replacement. I am sick of throwing my back out. I've been throwing it out since 9th grade. This is ridiculous. What is happening? So I could already sense that at age 30, 31, I'm like, dude, my right knee ain't getting any better. My left hip isn't getting any better. And now knowing what I know from the slow motion, that left hip was going to get replaced. That right knee was going to get replaced because it's just the way I was moving. It just is what it is. I wasn't going to get out of there alive. And I remember being in the NFL distinctively during OTAs and during the offseason, and any NFL players that are listening, they know this to be true. DeMaurice Smith, NFLPA guy, walks in and he'll draw an imaginary line down the middle of the room. And he'll say, everybody on this half of the room is going to end up getting a new knee or a new hip. That is like an accepted fact of professional football. And when you're in that meeting, you just kind of look and you're like, so what? Whatever. You don't think about it. You're 22, 23 years old. Nobody cares, right? Nobody's thinking about that. But looking back on that now, I'm like, oh shit. It's because we were WOTAs. Like, it's not because somebody's just, if somebody flies into the knee and they fly into the knee, so be it. It's a collision. But we're just doing this to ourselves. we're just beating ourselves up for no reason. And there's an actual answer out there that is inside ankle bone high. That's the answer. That's going to keep the knee from shredding. That's going to keep the hip from shredding. So the truth was what made me love Gilly so much. And then his backstory was like, man, this makes sense. Like, this dude don't need no money. He ain't making money off this. Like, we're just finally getting over that side of things because of how long it takes to really start a movement revolution and try to build this thing from the grassroots. Gilly's doing this out of the kindness of his heart, and that's why he buries people with the truth. He goes at people hard, and he's fighting for their backs. He's fighting for their knees. He's fighting for their hips. He's fighting for those people that, even if they're mad at him, the slow motion video doesn't lie. We know when you're going to need a new knee. We know when you're going to need a new hip. And people that fight that, so be it. We can only do so much. And that's why I say, don't even care what we say. Just go look at the video for yourself. Decide for yourself. I want you to do your own research. That's the crucial part of this, is when the regular Joe, the regular mom and dad, the regular kid, the athlete, they start to look at it and they do what you did, where you're like, hang on a second. There's just too much evidence here. And that's why, if you look at my page, I'm going to put a yellow circle where I want your eyes, and I want you to watch it. Just watch it move. You may not agree with it. You may not fully understand it, but it's going to happen. You're getting red pilled as you're at the page. You don't even know you're being red pilled. It's like the movie Inception, where I'm going in stealth. You don't even know it's happening, but you're going to start to see this. And people start to put those pieces together for themselves. They go back out into the world. They start to watch people walk at the supermarket. They go, holy crap, everybody looks like this. They start to think about their friends that got wrecked or their family members that got wrecked. And they go, oh yeah, Jimmy and Susie, they both walked like that. They both moved like that. And you go through your own life. You really do. You go backwards and you start putting it all together and you're like, oh, this makes too much sense. And the people that don't get it, Jeff, are the people that don't watch. That's been the common denominator. I've been on podcasts with people I've argued with. Zach Talander was one of the guys, the Olympic lifting guys. I couldn't get them to watch a video. They would not watch our stuff. The other trolls that come to the page, they discount the slow motion video. They don't want to look at it. And so that's where the truth is. And once that truth was presented to me from Gilly, I was like, I could breathe a sigh of relief. I was like, finally, I know where I'm at, and I know where I need to go.
Yeah, I think you made several great points there. I want to start with the most recent one is, look, guys, the truth can be handed to you, but if you refuse to confront it, if you refuse to look at it, there's nothing it's going to do for you, right? And ultimately, the responsibility is in your hands. And I think that's a powerful position to put in, but there's a high risk that you have to be willing to live with if you don't do anything about it. Because look, live your life, do what you want to do, enjoy what you enjoy, and reap the rewards. But also know there's generally going to be consequences as well. And if you can live with that, then so be it. But if you're searching for answers, if you're looking for answers, which I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially athletes, right? People that are high tuned to their body understand that there's a better way to do things. It should not be like this. And that kind of reflects my own, is I also have run the gamut of fitness titans and methods and all these things. And over the years have come to my own conclusions based on working with other people, my own experiences, etc. But it is one of those things that you'll start to find is this doesn't feel right. But you have to be able to take the intuition and the personal integrity and stand by it versus like you said earlier, looking and appealing to the person of authority standing over your shoulder and getting their approval before giving it a try. And it's funny because, Charles Poliquin, even though he was obviously a massive weightlifter, bodybuilder, and all that, he has made the argument so many times, and he used to be ridiculed, especially through now I think he's given the credit that's been due in terms of his professional, but during the 80s, during the 90s, this guy was ridiculed for the way he thought about things. And one of the biggest reasons was because he was so anti-literature. He was so anti-research because it doesn't, one, take all the bias and the financial vested interest and all that out of the picture. It just doesn't give us enough of the evidence. And I think a lot of people forget that the first step of the scientific process is the observation. It is looking at the information in space-time with your own two eyes and taking that observation and going, okay, this is what I see. This is what it looks like. What is step two? It's, can I duplicate this over and over and over and over without failure? And if I can, then we're on to something. If I can't, we still need to be looking for the answers in most cases, which most research, there's probably not a single research paper or piece of literature on the planet that is 100% certainty. There's always variables that impact and influence. No one can say 100% this is the way to do thing. And Paul Kuma is kind of one of those first people that like said, hey, take what you see, take the product of what you see. Are you getting a result from it, a result that you want? And if so, that should be enough for you. You don't have to look to the science. You don't have to look to the research. Right. And a lot of coaches, and this is the interesting thing, is a lot of the literature and the research of science, which I'm sure will very much be reflecting what you guys are talking about in 20, 30, 40 years, maybe longer, because it takes a long time for the science to catch up. But, it takes, the balls of an individual to say, hey, this is what I did. This is the way it worked. And it produced successful actions. And I don't really care what you guys say. I'm going to keep doing this because, I will say I'll kind of go off on a tangent here too. I've been very fortunate in my own professional career that I haven't had a lot of dogma and tradition kind of soaked into my training. I've always been able to kind of go out and see what are people doing and what is working and what's handling these problems and what's not and all these different things. But I've worked with a lot of Olympic coaches, coaches that have taught at that level. And I kind of I've talked about this with other people and myself, is it's a very different training approach, right? Because in the world of team sports, you're basically on a season-to-season basis. The kids that you get in or the players that you get in, it's for the most part until you get to the league and there's, multi-year contracts and stuff like that. But even then, it's a year-to-year basis. Look, I'm trying to win this year and I'm trying to do what it takes with whoever it takes to win. But on an Olympic level, the training tends to be a little bit more what I call mature, because a lot of coaches have tens of thousands of hours invested into their athletes. And the difference between Olympic sports and team sports generally is that team sports, there's a massive pool of individuals. And this is a problem in itself, which I'm sure you'll be able to go into more detail, is if Jimmy gets hurt at quarterback, there's a Tommy and a Joseph and a Bobby and
next man up.
There's someone else in line behind him. But if you're national level hammer throw, pick whatever Olympic sport you want, your best track athlete or whatever, there are very, very few people behind them because they are the best of the best. They are the 1%. So the training has to be a lot more thought out. It has to be a lot more methodical, and you have to do what works because you're working in, maybe annual blocks, but usually 2 years. You're looking at national championships, world championships. You have to qualify in order to go to the Olympics, which is every 4 years. So it tends to be a lot of these coaches, the Poliquins and these, a lot of the, what most people would consider innovations in fitness come from these guys, while all these other, national strength conditioning, your CSCS, they kind of live in the past. They're like 40, 50, 60, sometimes 100 years behind the coaches that are true. Science starts with doing something, with executing, and then finding out if it works or not. And then we go from there. But so many coaches are afraid because, well, this is what I read in my book, or this is what I just spent $100,000 in 4 years in college to learn. And now everything that you're saying goes against all of that stuff. They're too invested, right? They're too invested into these things.
That's exactly what we battle. Is that what you just said? You can feel it when you're arguing with them. Like they don't want to let it go, and they're not interested in new observations. It's really like you said. You're kind of starting from a certain standpoint. Like you and I are people who started from, I'm just going to observe this, right? I'm going to look. And so you never got entrenched. You were kind of just walking around the trenches, taking a look in to see what was down there. Oh, okay, that looks interesting. And then you move to a new one where some people, they got a shovel, they get in a trench and they keep digging and they keep digging. And no matter what you do, no matter how many hands you offer to them down in that trench, they don't want your hand. They don't want your help. They're going to continue to be invested in misunderstanding you. So it's just like you said, it really is. I mean, that's a great way that you put it. Especially the Olympic thing. I had never really thought about it like that with the Olympic compared to team sports. But when you look back, and this gets said at every single, NFL or college locker room, hey, next man up. As like week 2 and week 3 and week 4 and 7, 8, hey, next man up. The next man up needs to be ready, because you're right. It's just kind of run the next guy through, beat the crap out of these guys for a full year, and it's part of the game. But then, okay, rest up for a few months. All right, let's get back and let's do it all again. And by the time you're done with it and you look up, you're like, oh man, what just happened? And I'm talking to my buddies that, we just met this past season for the Orange Bowl reunion, and this guy's got a back surgery. This dude's got a knee. This dude's on his 6th knee surgery. This dude's back still blows out when he goes to grab the toothbrush. I'm like, and I'm looking at it now. I'm like, what are we doing? We don't think about it at that time. You don't think about what price you'll have to pay. And you did a great job of bringing that up. Like, hey, if you do what you want to do, but there's a collateral damage to what you're doing. And I think our real, not anger, but like our trying to wake people up is for the sake of that high school kid and that college kid, because that's where you're getting into the world of they don't have a choice. They literally do not have a choice. They have got to go to that lift because it's a team sport. They've got to do what they're asked to do. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the entrenchment is. And we're saying, dude, you've got these locomotive athletes that literally do not execute one lifting rep in their sport, but you are taking the lifting engine and you are doubling down on it. You're doubling down on it in the weight room, in the training. And it just so happens that the lifting engine, that torque mechanism, that rotary action off the inside corner of the foot, that's the same as the ACL shred. Just go look at the last 2 big names that got injured, Klay Thompson and Bud Dupree. And this is what's interesting about this time in our lives where we have access to social media. I can immediately go and see what Klay was doing in the offseason. Guess what? All inside ankle bone load training, all lifting engine work. You're cooking the brain and you're teaching the nervous system that it's okay to create torque off the inside ankle bone low. You're okay with it. Bud Dupree, go watch his training. Inside ankle bone low all day. Saquon Barkley, go watch his training. Inside ankle bone low all day. Odell Beckham, inside ankle bone low. Who was the other one? I'm skipping his name. But those are just
that's the problem. That's the problem. There's been so many.
There's been so many. The Achilles are through the roof, and it's like they're all training the same way. They're all going inside ankle bone low all day in the weight room. You're giving that athlete's nervous system permission to create torque off the wrong side of the foot. And so that's our big yell to the world. Like, hey, let's at the very least start with the locomotive athletes, right? If you're 30 and you want to go work out and do whatever you want to do, I'll help you out too if you ask for questions and you want some, guidance. But at the very least, let's talk about this training that's going on with our youngsters, our high schoolers and our college kids, and even some of the pros.
Yeah,
Von Miller, that was the one I was thinking of. Von Miller, literally right before camp, was doing like I'm talking real Olympic lifting, like knee sleeves, the shoes, had the whole look. Like he was literally Olympic lifting. Boom, blew his ankle, right? Like it's not hard if you just do the observation. It's right there. They're training this way, and then they're hurting themselves this way, and those two go together.
Yeah, I gotta say, even though I'm very much in the weightlifting, I guess you could call it whatever community. I wouldn't even say weightlifting in the traditional sense because I don't do weightlifting. Like I don't do snatches and clean and jerks and all this other shit.
Right.
And I don't even do powerlifting. Obviously, I use bench press and stuff like that. But the weight and squat, just the way they train it, I'm not in that route, but I still am in lifting weights. And that's one of the things that I want to ask you guys personally. I think a lot of people are going to be interested by this as well. Is a couple things. First is we understand the forward locomotion. Well, let's assume we understand the forward locomotion here. At least I do, and you do. We understand that. One of the things that first kind of brought that to light for me was we utilized heavily sled training with our football athletes because we use them for everybody. I even use them. It's one of my favorite things, even just for regular clients. Yeah. But that was one of the first. I've seen your guys' video and I go, okay. And then I just happened to be training a client one day and we're doing sleds, but I never really paid that close of attention, and then I watched their feet and I watched their ankles and the way they moved. And that's for me I kind of had this is really interesting because this, and I'll kind of preface this story. We coached a local high school team, it was an international school. They're nationally ranked. They're basically and I don't mean this in any offensive manner, but they're basically a band of misfits thrown together, right? So what the coach of this school does is they go into the sticks of Canada and even overseas into Europe and stuff, and they find these really promising players, these really promising athletes, but they kind of get overlooked, right? Because no one's looking in these places for them. They've had several guys go to Indiana, guy go to Clemson, major D1 schools, but they find them. You've never heard of these kids, but this kid comes in. In fact, one of them was a high jumper, Canadian high jumper. I think some national records or whatever. Never played football in his life. Comes in senior year, freak athlete, 6'4", lean, could jump over the moon, and then he gets signed to Clemson as a wide receiver. I mean, just like incredible team. But the unique thing about this team was, one, it is a band of misfits. It's not like most state football programs where these kids have played together from pee-wees all the way through high school. So that throws an interesting dynamic in there. But the other interesting dynamic was that they get a lot of this bad training. And for us, even though we still use weightlifting, we didn't use it always in the traditional sense that a lot of other schools use it. And sleds was probably the biggest tool outside anything else. I just for the record, I do not believe in Olympic lifts for anybody outside of Olympic lifting. I don't think it has as much to offer us. I definitely agree with you guys on that. I'm 100% on that page. I totally agree. Powerlifting, same thing. But I do want to kind of touch on a couple things. My first question is, let me finish that thought. I saw the client pushing the sled, and I saw that rotation and that torque of the heel flipping out naturally. It was one of those things that you didn't even have to coach, and I never even recognized it myself. But then I looked at that. It's just they're moving forward and they're moving mass forward. What does the body instinctually do to execute that? Well, if you try to do it like a lift, that thing's not going anywhere. No. But then you just instinctually see them kind of take that pattern in, and you go, oh wow, okay, that was for me when I was like, okay, this is starting to get really interesting, because I've seen it. I've seen what these guys are talking about. And now that my brain is kind of open, and I'm, like you said, I'm now out in the world observing, having those same things, walking into the grocery store going, holy shit. And then training my clients and still not really thinking about it, but then going, well, wait a second. That was for me, really the breaking point for me was to go, I really am going to pay attention to what these guys are saying, because I just watched that. Not only did I see a video, I now with my own eyes in person see this pattern occurring. But one of the questions that, and maybe you guys have covered it, I haven't seen it or whatever, is there is backward movement in field sports, in team sports. Sometimes you have to pedal backwards, sometimes you have to move backwards, etc. What do you guys teach as far as that goes? Because again, maybe you guys have talked about it, I just haven't seen it or whatever. Yeah. But where does that come in? Because obviously they're now moving backwards. How do things change, or do things change in your guys' eyes?
So like a perfect example for this, to kind of give people a good visual that we're used to seeing, would be a defensive back, right? A defensive back is literally using a back pedal as part of their skill set. And that's where I would start with this, is that it's a skill, right? It's a technique that's used in the game to help the athlete gather information. So the DB would be using back pedal to read the wide receiver's body language, to read the tight end, the tackle, whatever his job is for that play, read the quarterback's eyes. He's going to use the back pedal to gather information. But upon further review, if you actually look at what happens when it's time to make a move, either make a move to break on the ball or make a move to not let your cushion get chewed up, all of those moments, the moments of max neural drive, that's GOATA. That's switching back into forward gear. So I'm backpedaling, and now he throws a hitch, and I got to step the foot in the ground and drive forward. That's got to be GOATA. He breaks in on a slant. I put the foot in the ground and break forward. That's got to be GOATA. He runs an out. I break. You see the pattern. No matter what the athlete does, the back pedal was just there for them to gather information. Any DB knows this. As soon as they chew up cushion, you got to switch to drive. You got to flip the hips, and you got to open, you got to run. You got to get into the drive gear. So those moments are natural and they're fine, right? The problem is when you make it habitual, to move off the inside corner of the foot. That's when it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem if I assess you and I look at you and I go, dude, you can't set a bow with your ankle. This is an issue, because guess what's going to happen as you're turning over those cycles and you're in this interval world where you got blah, 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 and your bodies are flying. You're going to put the inside of your foot down. You're going to use what torque you have available to you because you need to get the job done. And so that's what happens when these guys, they go to put their foot down. They don't have an ankle hinge in the set. That shin bone can't turn 22.5 degrees on the outside corner of the foot. They don't have full access there. So what do? Well, create torque another way. Put the inside of the foot in the ground, spin the ankle engine forward, down, and in, and then try to snap it out. That's how people are getting the shreds. So long as you don't create a habit of being somebody that's using the inside corner of your foot, which is why we completely stay away from a lifting derivative for the nervous system's sake. And what we've done is we've said, okay, landmines, sleds, the Henny strap, the jammer, a med ball, my plyos, my sprints, that's where we can level up the athlete dynamically, right? We can keep them in this pattern of bow to corner, 22.5 out, 45-degree wash in. I can stay inside ankle bone high as I move the landmine. I can stay inside ankle bone high as I do the sled, the Henny, the jammer, the plyo. All those things I can level up not only my ability to create force using the proper mechanisms, right? So now I'm creating force, but I'm also doing it in a way that's going to keep me out of that pattern that is the ACL shred. So that's our big thing, is that everybody's been looking at force, right? Well, we got to create more force. Yeah, no kidding. You could put way more weight on a sled than you could ever put on an athlete's back. So if it's really about putting weight on something, then let's be real here. You could do way more weight on the sled than you could on a back squat. But the issue is that we're just looking at numbers like, oh, well, his force numbers went up. Did you look at how he created force? Because if he's creating force in reverse, this kid's a ticking time bomb. So whatever sort of increase you got in force production, you also got an increase in lack of durability, right? You've taken this athlete's security system that is inside ankle bone high, and you've sacrificed it for more force in a lift that's actually got nothing to do with those moments of max neural drive that are going to be playing out on the field court pitch. Everything's going to be drive gear. So we've got to level up drive gear, and we want to keep these inside ankle bone low sort of mechanisms out of our athlete's nervous system, because we don't want them creating torque off the inside of the foot. That's just Russian roulette for the ACL and the Achilles.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you point it out like that. Again, not being from football, I don't really know the mechanics of the position, but then when you explain it, I go, oh, okay, that makes tons of sense. That's 100% accurate. At least the way I see it. So here's one of the questions that I want to touch on is, so you guys have basically accumulated your own set of strength training exercises. I've seen that you take traditional variations and kind of move them more in the way that you guys want these athletes to move, in terms of really driving the internal rotation coming from the hips, making sure that the shin bone and the femur and everything rotate together. They're not going opposite directions, all these different things. Do you guys at all see any validity, not in Olympic lifts, because we're just going to assume we're not even talking about that, but in more traditional strength exercises, especially in contact sports where mass can be good for certain individuals that come in contact, like maybe you want to be a little bigger. You're a football player, or you play rugby or whatever. Do you guys see validity in chin-ups and squatting? Granted, you're not squatting like a power lifter, and some of this stuff. Do you guys see any validity in that, or are you guys totally like, no, fuck all that. We don't need this, part of my language. You don't need any of that stuff. Only do that. Like, is there a middle ground somewhere? Is it? Yes. Maybe you can explain more of that, because I think that's probably, at least for what people have asked me. And by the way, I know nothing about your guys' system from the inside, because people have asked me, hey, have you taken their courses and this? And no, I haven't. Yeah. So this is all totally new to me.
Yes, these are great questions.
So do you see validity in quote unquote, some more of the traditional strength training stuff that you would see? Like I said, bench press for football players, or chin ups, or even squatting and stuff like this.
Great question. And yes. So it's kind of like, and here's how I'll start this, so the question kind of is sort of centered around hypertrophy a little bit, right? Like, if I got to put on size, we get that one a ton. Like, well, what about gaining weight? So first off, if I'm being honest with people, at one point I was 236 at Iowa, like way heavier than I am now. And then at one point in Iowa, I was like 215, 210, still doing the same training. But you know what the big difference was? How much I ate. I was on the old seafood diet, seafood, eat food, right? I was literally just scarfing down food. So we always start there with the athlete and the parent. We're like, listen, if you want to get bigger, first and foremost, you got to eat. Yeah. Now, once you're in the weight room, like make no mistake about it, if you went down to New Orleans and you worked with Gary, you would not leave that room being like, oh, I didn't get a good workout in. Right. So we're clicking at the same pace that everybody grew up with, everybody knew and loved, and the music's loud, the chalk's flying around, everybody's sweating. It's got a vibe to it. It's got an energy to it. What we've done is we've taken things and we use the word GOATify. We just GOATify it. So what we'll always tell our clients and our athletes and our coaches and the parents is make sure it's in the math, right? Make sure that it's applying to the forward locomotive pattern. So we do squats. We just make sure that the coach and the athlete understands that, hey, the squat is the landing. Okay. So the squat is just one phase of this locomotive cycle. So my squat is my landing, my hinge is my leaving. And those are the two ancient shapes that the hunter-gatherer uses to kind of put them on the gatherer side. Can I get my butt to the ground? Can I get my hands to the ground to interact? The squat isn't going to be used like it would be used in traditional sense where I'm going to drive out of the hole because I don't want to turn on the lifting engine for that athlete. I'm really just trying to build the bow for that athlete during the squat. So the goblet really allows them to, it's like this fine line where, and this is the great work that Grakovetsky did with the spinal engine, is he's saying, listen, it's not a clear, concise line as to when the athlete's going to turn on the lifting engine. It's going to be based on that weight in that person, meaning 40 pounds for you is going to be different than 40 pounds for my Aunt Lisa, right? So it's going to be dependent upon the human being and the weight in question. So by giving them a little bit of weight, you actually help them in the suppleness category. So now we're using the squat to build the bow. We're using the hinge to feed the cornering process. When we want to put it together and be dynamic, we want to make sure that we can go from bow to corner, which the landmine allows us to do, the sled allows us to do, the henny. So we still use the squat, we still use the hinge, we still use the lunge, we still use the bench. There's times that we'll bench, but we'll make sure if we do a bench day, that once they step off that bench, they're going to superset it with some side bends so that even though they're working some midline stabilization, they're going to at least walk off that thing and we have something to superset it with. So the feel and the flow of a session is really no different than anything I ever grew up in. It's no different at all. It's just that everything's centered around this math. Is the 22.5 there? Is the 45 there? Are all these numbers there? Am I inside ankle bone high? Am I back chain dominant? Are my columns organized? So it's really, as a GOATA coach, you should be exhausted after coaching a session because you're going around the gym and you're like, hey, get that inner ankle bone high. Hey, get that second toe a little bit straighter. Hey, see this shin bone? Turn it right here. See how your head's not floating into, so you're kind of just, it's like obedience school. You're going around and you're kind of calling out bad behavior and you're calling out good behavior. And you're trying to work that person into understanding that this is how I want to be. This is how I want to train. I want to get this into my nervous system so that it's subconscious. And that's the recode. You're just burning this pattern into basically you're taking that pattern and you're bringing your body back to it, right? It was always there to start. We lost it. So now we're trying to work backwards and code it back in. And the older you get, the harder it is to do. So you got to put more and more focus. That's why it's best when you get an athlete at the growth plate stage, 11, 12 years old, dude, they're ready for change. If they've been slightly decoded from a bad shoe or a chair, it's a quick turnaround. So a lot of those kids, you can just put them on the ground and they'll clean up just by letting them reorganize in their resting shapes. So it sort of depends on what athlete I'm talking about. But yes, to answer your question, we've taken that traditional stuff and we've just GOATified it. Make sure that we've added that rotation in the ankle engine, added at the hip, added at the spine, depending on whether I'm in a bilateral or a split stance. It all feels familiar. It's just slightly on a different blueprint. That's why we say we're trying to offer the industry a new blueprint. We're saying here, the old map of neutral, tripod foot, core brace, that's got nothing to do with locomotion, guys. Locomotion are these things. There's these behaviors you want. You want to be ideally second toe straight. You want to be inside ankle bone high. You want to set a bow and then you want to corner it. So let's make sure our training reflects that.
I like that. That gives a lot of clarity into probably a lot that you don't necessarily see on your Instagram, probably for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't just want to throw everything that you do on Instagram, but two,
Yeah,
just because you guys do, it's hard to produce. And again, you know, a lot of times when you're seeing people's Instagrams, you're only getting a bird's eye view, right? You're not really like, people extrapolate weird things from looking at Instagrams. Sometimes it's like,
everybody's got a style. I got people that'll come to me, Jeff, and they'll be like, well, let me see you jump. Let me see you run. I go, my guy, if I was in a wheelchair, the slow motion video would still show what it shows. It doesn't matter. Like, it's got nothing to do with me. People want to be like, well, you don't do this. I'm like, so what? What's it matter? The slow motion video is what you should be looking at, not me. You know what I'm saying? You should be watching the video and not worrying about what I'm doing. We're trying to mimic the behavior of the indigenous and the baby. We're trying to mimic those closest to nature. It just so happens that Michael's doing it, Barry's doing it, Randy's doing it, Ed's doing it, Simone Biles doing it. These other people they still have that pattern. And the more and more we sit around in sedentary lifestyle in chairs and wear bad footwear, we all run the risk of decoding ourselves. And it's not just about being a great athlete. The GOATA goes into every single different niche, because we're trying to not only eliminate the non-contacts, we want to eliminate the joint replacements. And that number is just, it's going through the roof.
Exponentially.
It is through the roof. It is through the roof.
It's exponential increases. I mean, the numbers are scary. You know, and just within the professional sports environment itself, you're looking at billions of dollars of injured athletes, billions of dollars. And then, you know, just add one society, which is America, to that, and you're getting into the probably, you know, in years coming, trillions of dollars worth of medical, unnecessary, probably by your guys' standards, and certainly mine, of medical expenses. One of the things that, this may be totally just kind of off, but just because you're talking about a lot about the indigenous and things like this, do you guys kind of match your same ideals with the indigenous movement and as food as well? I don't get too big on nutrition, but that would be an interesting thing to kind of see. Like, I know that coaching athletes and stuff, you know, obviously outside of gaining weight, it's kind of a see everything. But if movement, like, this is how they move, and we look at how they eat, is that something that you guys kind of like cross over into what you guys teach your athletes, or is that something that you just kind of avoid altogether? Or
we I personally, and most of our coaches, stay away from nutrition. Now, some coaches, we have a hive, and this hive is beautiful. There's a ton of coaches in it, and they come from all over, and they've got these different skill sets. And there are people in there that can speak on nutrition, and I'm not one of them. And I'm not somebody that follows a strict diet. But it's interesting, because if you look at some of the things that have become more popular lately surrounding the diet, one of them being intermittent fasting, and then the other one being the mind-blowing revelation that we should eat real food and not processed food. If you look at that, what are those two things? That's just hunter-gatherer technology. That's just obvious things that would have had to happen and would have been natural to us out in the bush, out in the wild. You're not going to always get the kill. You're not going to always have tons of food to just sit there on the couch in Manjan. So you now have the ability to kind of use some of that old world technology in our regular day to day. Like, people are using intermittent fasting. I use it. I love it. I skip the first meal. I push it back. I'm not like the strictest person about it, but I do it and I like it. And everybody knows the benefit of eating, not vegan, but like eating, you know, more vegetables, more fruits, making sure that the meat that you do get, it's well raised, and all these types of things. So we've already kind of started to shift that way as a society, where we're valuing what has worked for the indigenous cultures for hundreds of thousands of years. We're kind of now bringing the movement to it, right? And we're saying, dude, like, they eat like this, and guess what? They move like this. And so our movement rest cycle needs to reflect that of the indigenous, right? When we walk, however much you walk, when you do walk, make sure that it's inside ankle bone high, right? You know, and we try to encourage people to walk more, to try to use their legs more during the day, but it is what it is. People have to work, they have to sit down, they have to do their jobs. We kind of have to be realistic about this. So we can mimic the movement rest cycle of the indigenous in the modern world. Like, we can have our cake and eat it too. When we walk inside ankle bone high. The shoe choices we try to make a more minimalist shoe choice. And then when we do rest, make sure that you get back to the ground. And we have Seiza chairs on our website. Amazon has Seiza chairs. They're out there. Like, you can build a floor desk for yourself. So we definitely think people should be mimicking the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. From a nutrition standpoint, I can't speak on it much besides eat real food, and then fasting seems to be working for a lot of people. But from a daily lifestyle of how that movement rest cycle plays out, you got to make sure you walk well, because that walk is going to crush you. If you just put on them stepper watches and you walk around the house, if you finish the day with thousands of steps that are GOATA, you just hurt yourself. You were hurting yourself all day. If those are GOATA steps, you're actually healing yourself. You're inside the math. You're inside nature's code for security. If you're resting on the floor, it's all inside ankle bone high. So now you create a new lifestyle, a new environment for yourself that's really going to require no extra time. Like, for me, I'm somebody, I don't train. I don't like go and work out at the gym. I rest on the ground all day as best I can. And then I make sure when I do walk, I'm walking inside ankle bone high. And eventually it just turns over to where it becomes your habit. Now I go into a room, I'm not looking for the chair. Why? Because I've told my brain that we're not going to do that anymore. I've repped it out. I've made a new habit, a new routine. So we definitely see that being a huge emphasis for us. And like I said earlier, I don't know if we had even started recording, I see myself as probably more of a lifestyle coach, just kind of trying to guide people to a different way of interacting with their day-to-day. Pick a different shoe. A lot of the questions I get, what shoe should I wear? What kind of chairs do you guys sit in? How do I walk? And so those are the things I'm excited about helping people with, because I think that makes the biggest impact. That's the 90%. Right? 10% is maybe your training. The 90% is your lifestyle. Do the 90% GOATA. When you wake up in the morning, you got to do two things. You got to move and you got to rest. Make sure those two things are GOATA, and you will find yourself on the other side of that spectrum, where you're at least moving from BOTA to GOATA, and you're staying away from the WOTA side. You're staying away from the non-contact shreds, the unexplained injuries, and the eventual joint replacements.
No, I like that. I like that approach. A lot of coaches, a lot of trainers try to go balls to the wall with their clients and their athletes. And, those generally have short-term and non-lasting effects. Yep. It's really these habitual things that we can, the little things that we can habitually do day in and day out that really have the most massive improvements. And it sounds cliche and it sounds cheesy, like you're at a conference and somebody's trying to make you feel better about your life, but it's true, right? Like, it's these tiny little things. If we can just make tiny little incremental changes that are going to stick for the long term, those are always going to have the great, that's like for me, even when I don't get much into nutrition either. It's just not really one of those things. I'm also not the best opinion leader in terms of that, both from just like a theoretical standpoint, but also a practical standpoint. Cause I like what I like, and I'll live with that. I'll live with it and die with it probably. But one of the things, I was going somewhere with that. Okay. Yeah, the nutrition stuff. I just wanted to touch on that just because I was just curious if you guys had an opinion or not. But outside of that, it's not really like one of the things that. But the resting postures that you talk about, the Seiza, that's actually a stretch that I've used for quite some time, 7 or 8 years with clients, is really stretching out the front of that ankle, because, like you said, sitting in a chair all day, and then if you're in the gym or whatever, your ankles, for most people, especially if you're doing powerlifting and stuff like that, your ankle's stuck at 90 degrees. The front of the ankle is tight. You're going to get no extension from your calf whatsoever, and which is obviously very important when you're trying to move forward, is that you're getting that good extension. You're coming up onto the ball of your foot to access a lot of these patterns that you talk about, which is also one of the interesting things that I really liked about you guys, because flexibility tends to be one of my niches within weight training, because even within that, trying to dissolve people's ideas of like flexibility and how to be flexible and all these things, you guys actually use a lot of different stretches as well to kind of access some of these positions and get the soft tissue to, loosen up a little bit, to allow access to, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the stretches that you guys use. The Seiza being almost just a natural one in general, because you'll find, and I know I've found, basketball players and football players, their ankles are so tight. They can't do it. It's painful. They can't sit on the top of their ankles. They can't do it.
And so that's the point that I think Philip Beach was trying to make in Muscles and Meridians. He's like, look, okay, all terrestrial animals are resting on the ground to stay in tune. We're the only ones not doing it. Then we try to go down to the ground to get into these postures, and our gyroscopes are screaming at us. The ankle screams at us. The knee screams at us. The hip screams at us. And these are postures that are supposed to be a birthright. Like, you got kids, you see the kids, what do they instinctively do?
Yeah.
You didn't teach your kids Seiza. They just did it, right? That's that morphic resonance, that collective subconscious coming out. They're just behaving how humans behave. So those postures are going to give us this suppleness almost for free. I mean, I've done a lot of hard workouts in my life, and I tell people this: the hardest thing to do is to commit to sitting on the ground for the full day. You know it. I remember when we started first interacting, I was like, oh, Jeff knows that he's supposed to sit on the ground.
Yeah.
Like, he hangs out on the ground. And like, you know how taxing that is on the back, in the hips. And when you stand up, dude, you feel strong. And it's really like suppleness from a different standpoint. Like, I was always like flexible. Like, I was like flexible guy, had that ability to touch the toes, but I was still a WOTA. So my flexibility was fooling me into thinking that I was a good mover, when in reality my patterns were bad. But guess what? When I would get back into Seiza and I would be real honest with myself, my left ankle was barking at me. When I get down into crisscross, my left hip was barking at me. So I always kept coming back to it. I'm like, dude, these postures are a birthright to me, and I don't have access to them. So from a suppleness standpoint, I think a lot of our suppleness trouble can be cleaned up just by getting back to the ground. Now, there's a little disclaimer there, because you got to remember where you came from. Right. You've been coming from sitting in the 90-degree world with the knee on the chair. You've been doing that for decades. So you got to just ease yourself back into the ground, which is where the Seiza chair comes in, or some sort of support device that's going to basically bridge the gap with the missing knee flexion and the missing ankle gyroscope availability down there. Right. So you kind of bridge the gap, and you start getting these athletes more comfortable in these postures of repose. That in and of itself is going to build up the suppleness. Some of the other stretches that we like to do is, we talk pivot points a lot. So the basic pivot point, and I can kind of demonstrate it to help make more sense. Pivot point being what's in the ground. So my starting point would be 6 pivot points, right? 2 in the hands, outside blade of the hand, basically inside wrist bone high, inside ankle bone high. Think of it that way. The kneecaps, and then the tops of the feet, like I talked about, the upside down, inside ankle bone high. So there's my first starting point for the baby, right? This is where they get to. They get to this child rocker position. They got 6 pivot points. So they got a lot of stability where they can now move these gyroscopes. We eventually get into a world where we're going to let 2 go. Now we've got 4. And then I can step it up to 3 pivot points, which is basically, if you can't see this, it's the on deck circle, or it's baseball picture day. And we're all just kind of sitting on one, we're hanging out on one knee. But if you look at this split stance, here's the math, right? So watch my chest turn out, watch my kneecap point out, this thigh. And so we can stretch in these classical positions, this half kneeling, this on deck position. And then we can even take the suppleness to standing, where we're now working on our squat suppleness, our ability to sit down into the resting squat, our ability to touch the hands to the floor. All those great things we're building suppleness inside the math and inside these ancient postures, whether they be standing, the squat and the hinge, or the resting world, getting into that half kneeling, or floor rest being crisscross, Seiza, cowboy. Our groundwork is what we call that. And that'd be basically the base of the GOATA pyramid would be the groundwork. Everybody's going through it. How much of it depends on that athlete. Then you take them to the standing support work. Then you get into dynamic. So the real beginning is what you're saying, trying to get them more supple, right? Yeah. Trying to get that ankle engine to behave on the mat, trying to get that foot to be strong on the outside pivot point, and get everything kind of starting from the ground up. So yeah, the suppleness is huge, and we use the ground as a way to cultivate it.
No, I really like that approach. Ido Portal is probably one of the first, I don't want to speak for you, probably one of the first people you had kind of that idea, as well as for me, right? It's like, look, flexibility is great and all, you can do it wrong. Let's start with squatting, because a lot of people can't squat, and it's normal and it's natural. And like you said, everywhere except first world countries in this world, that's how they rest. They sit in a squat, or they sit in a Seiza, which, for anyone who can't see the video, or a Seiza is just, you're sitting on your heels.
You can Google it.
with your toes, you're sitting on the top of your ankles. It's a pretty standard resting position. And like you said, 100%, the kids, even I saw you kind of posting, I was like, oh, well, take a look at my kids. Not that I don't look at my kids all day, but I started really even noticing that. I sent you some photos. I was like, my baby sleeps like this.
Yes.
8 to 12 hours he's in this position. Well, maybe not exactly. He moves around, but he at least comes to this position, starts here, ends here, whatever.
Right.
And then my son, who's sitting in a chair, he isn't even using the chair the way the chair is designed.
Don't want to.
He's sitting on his
what do we tell the kid? What do we tell?
Sit down straight. Sit down. Yeah, sit on your butt.
Yeah. You don't even realize what we code into our own kids day to day. Like we code WOTA unknowingly. We do it. We don't know it. And it's just because we weren't taught. But now it's a situation where you can let your kids sit like that. Like I tell my son, I'm like, dude, when you're at school, try to sit like this. And he's like, well, the teacher will get mad at me. I'm like, oh, you can get a pass from me. And so like my wife,
I'm the same way. Or don't worry, like my son wants to take his shoes off everywhere we go. He wants to go to the playground, shoes off. He wants to go play outside, shoes off. He does not want to wear shoes. And I'm like, yeah, man, take your shoes off. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like,
right. That's how my wife is. I'll let the kids go outside and they'll take the shoes off and they'll go nuts. They'll go ham. They'll run around. They're like all about finding bugs and making forts and booby traps. They just watch Home Alone. So they're out there like they're barefoot and they come rushing back in and it's muddy. It's like, we don't even realize what we put a big shoe on them because we don't want mud in the house. And we don't want you sitting like that on a chair because you get your feet. There's all these little things that we don't even know we're doing to ourselves. And we're kind of coding ourselves into this sedentary WOTA lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, as fathers, we can definitely speak on the fact that like kids are sponges, right? So, they will absorb whatever you're putting into them. So, we all fall short sometimes, but you have to understand that, like, as that's one of the things it's hard for me is like, especially as a guy, right? You're just responsible for yourself for so long. Then you have kids and you still have that same attitude, but then you kind of have to take a second and go, wait a second here. I mean, outside the obvious, like everything that I say, every action that I do, these kids are just, like you said, part of natural law, natural science is to sit back and observe first. Let me observe and see how these things play out. And now I'm going to repeat those things and I'm going to do those things. And it's an excellent place to start is if you can start putting these things into the kids. Look, like you said earlier, there's only so much we can do. They're going to go to the middle school and the high school and get some shitty training. They're going to go to college, at least for the time being. They're going to get some horrible weight training. And let me be the first to tell you guys, and you can probably speak on this professionally as well, is when you get to the pros, not only is it no different, oftentimes it's worse. So if you can get some of these very basic patterns in there, sitting down on the ground, I don't care if you play Xbox, sit on the floor and do it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. Exactly. Whatever. Easy. I think that's like a really great takeaway for people is that's really something easy, and like you said, man, if the school, I say screw the school. I don't care what the teacher says, but it's. I have the same attitude.
I've got a bunch of on my street. I got a bunch of teachers, and so one of the teachers was asking about sitting on the floor, and she's like, "I thought it was bad for their backs," and I've heard this multiple times. Yeah. People telling me like, "Well, sitting on the ground is bad for my back." I'm like, the people that sit on the ground don't have any back problems. The people that sit in the chairs have the back problems. I'm like, just think common sense wise. I've told this to people. I say the floor desk changes the world. If we can get this into the schools and start the kids on the floor and let them progress through high school on the floor, and they can mold that inside ankle bone high during the growth, during that sort of development, they're not going to lose it. These kids are losing it at like second, third, fourth grade. Like you're seeing it creep into like this fifth and sixth grade population. I see it with some of the kids on the street. They're already dipping inside ankle bone low. They're already starting to show a little front chain. And it's like, well, yeah, they're sitting in these chairs for 8 hours a day. Yeah. Like they're getting more to a sedentary lifestyle, in the sedentary meaning that they're sitting or locked into a chair. So if we could just revalue the basic movement rest cycle, man, you're like 70, 75% there. And then the rest can just be kind of supplemented into the training.
I mean, I think that's at least one thing everyone can agree on, regardless of whether
everybody
you're the GOATA or weightlifter or whatever. We all know sitting in a chair is bad, right? Like that's, I think that's a really digestible thing for people to take away for sure is like, hey, this is a great idea. This is great strategies to start implementing some of these things. I know little things, sitting on the floor, sitting on top of my ankles, especially because I'm a squatter and I love squatting and I am married to that. I'll go ahead and admit it. But after a squat session for me, nothing feels better than just sitting on the top of my ankles for 5-10 minutes, on the
what Gilly
floor
says.
and
Wash it away.
Yeah,
like you're saying,
that's
if
exactly
you're
what
gonna
it's
do
like.
these things, if you're going to do these things, at least have a plan and at least understand what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're going to squat, know that what it's doing is coding something that you don't want to take to your forward locomotion. So you make the smart move and say, okay, I'm going to wash it away. And then it just becomes a case of like just using our common sense to navigate this thing. Like, okay, my defensive back or my quarterback, he doesn't really need it. Why? Well, he doesn't care particularly for squats because he does not somebody that's interested in that. He's very positional. He's just trying to play quarterback better. So like there's certain things that we can keep away from our athletes, but we can still do them as people, as general population, if that's what is, what you fancy. Yeah. But what we're saying is these locomotive athletes, let's keep their nervous systems clean because they got to fly around out there on Sunday or Saturday. They got to run. And if we interject the wrong side of the foot into this equation, they're in trouble. But even for like a weightlifter, even the most, brazen power lifter or the best Olympic lifter, they still need to appreciate that, hey, guess what? I'm a human being first. Yeah. And the human being is designed to move like this. I don't get to decide how I'm going to load the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon is designed a certain way. Mother Nature sewed that fabric a certain way so that when you land, you're inside ankle bone high and you turn that shin bone out to load the bow and then you release it around the corner. You can't go loading against the Achilles tendon over and over and over again and think that you're just going to get away with it. Yeah. And it's even more obvious when you watch the tape and you see an Achilles shred and you're like, oh, well, they're completely unraveling the Achilles as they try to load an asinine amount of pressure into the column. Of course, the Achilles tendon exploded, right? Yeah. It's just bad behavior. It's not that that athlete's quad isn't firing or that their hammy's not strong enough. That's a freaking professional athlete. They're thoroughbreds. It's a bad pattern. It's a faulty mechanism in the nervous system. We can code it out. We got to be smart.
Yeah, I like that explanation. I like too that like a lot of guys think that there's somehow magically you're going to be able to produce the amount of force in a weight room that you will on a field using plyometrics. And like we know with the science and with the literature, like a normal cadence and a jog, you're looking at around 4 times body weight. Exactly. Now imagine if you're overweight. Now imagine, like unless you're squatting, let's say professional football player who's going to be around, depending on their height, size, whatever, anywhere from probably 220 to 250, they're in the 200s. None of these guys are squatting 1,000 pounds. So there's no way there's nothing in the weight room that is going to mimic the force production and absorption that your joints and your tendons need to handle on a field other than doing that thing on a field. Yes. And again, that's just a jog. So imagine if you jump 36 inches in the air, you're a wide receiver, you go up for the ball, and now you're coming down on your ankles and your knee. You can't duplicate that. You can't duplicate that, right? So I definitely agree 100%. The only way to train that is by doing that and doing that correctly and in a way that's efficient and safe. And what you guys have seemed to crack the code. I mean, would you say that? Would you say, look, guys, we've kind of figured it out. I mean, this is an interesting time for you guys because look, people are looking for this answer. People are looking for this answer. Professional teams spend billions and trillions of dollars collectively, if you look across all sports, all teams, for this answer. Would you say you guys have cracked the code? Would you guys say you have found the way to prevent non-contact sports injuries in our athletes, every level?
100%. 100%. And that's why we keep telling people, and I keep writing this to people, inside ankle bone low shreds, all of them. Inside ankle bone high shreds, 0. Find me the inside ankle bone high shred. Find me when that athlete sets a bow and their knee explodes. Find me when that athlete sets a bow and their Achilles explodes. You're not going to find it. So people will get mad at us because we'll talk in absolutes. And I'm like, I didn't make up the absolutes. Like I said, I'm just Rick. I'm just another guy, 2.0 student. Like, I didn't come up with this. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. I'm watching shred after shred, guys, and they're all the same mechanism. They're all inside ankle bone low. And then you go look at the training, and you go, oh, crap, the training's inside ankle bone low. Oh, my God. So then the next step, Jeff, is what? 2 + 2 = 4. And that's all we're asking people to do is to watch the shreds, then watch the training, and then you yourself got to go, oh my gosh, they're the exact same. And I use the examples of the most recent ones that are in people's mind. Go watch Klay Thompson's train. Go watch Bud Dupree. Go watch what Von Miller. Go watch Odell. Go watch what they did to their nervous system. They gave their nervous system permission to create torque off the wrong side of the foot. If you are going to play inside ankle bone low, you are literally playing Russian roulette with the nervous system. And the more lifting inputs that you give to that nervous system, it's like adding more bullets into the chamber. And you're just getting closer and closer to the shred. And we're watching people break themselves down in slow motion. We are predicting the injuries before they happen because we have the slow motion to do that now. And we've got this wild collection of video because of social media. GOATA keeps confirming itself. WOTA keeps confirming itself. And that's what people forget to realize, is that every single day I go to my feed and I've got 10 more clips that I just scraped to put into my library. So unfortunately, this next weekend, you're going to see another shred. And it's going to be on tape, and then we're going to be able to see it, and then we're going to go back and say, look what they were doing in the training. And it's going to keep happening until somebody goes, okay, I think somebody with enough influence and enough money to make a move and is going to sort of start the thing. They're going to start to go, okay, we got to listen to what's going on here. And that's really what we are asking people to do. Is I want them to watch the shreds for themselves. I don't want you to take my word for it. I challenge people to go find the inside ankle bone high shred. That's what Gilly did to me. Gilly was like, go find me the inside ankle bone high shred, because he knew that I'd have to go look at all the shreds to find one that was inside ankle bone high, and all I saw was inside ankle bone low. So he basically tricked me into to seeing what the truth is. So yes, we definitely feel that we have the system here, and that's probably why we're so fired up and shouting at the rooftops, because we don't want to see another Achilles shred. Like we've unfortunately, or another ACL shred. We've unfortunately sat down with and talked to, at least in person, some of the athletes, but people that handle some of the athletes, and told them what would happen if they did not fix it, and they didn't listen, and that exactly happened. So when Gilly's been doing this for what, 10, 20 years now, he's been calling out ACL shreds. He called out ACL shreds on Gary. That's what really started this whole thing, was Gilly's in the gym saying, that dude, better look out, boom, boom, boom. And then Gary's like, oh, this old dude knows something. This wise man here has seen something. Let me take a look. And then Gary looked at it, and then Gary was able to reverse engineer it to fit the training. So now we've got a full system that can fit any human across the population, whether you're a 60-year-old lady that's just trying to prevent the knee replacement, or you're a thoroughbred that's got to go play on Sunday. The system works for you because you're human. How much of the system you need is going to be dependent on you, and where you're at is going to be dependent on your assessment. But we definitely can fix it. It's totally fixable, because it's a movement error that we find in the training, and we find it in the rest cycle.
Yeah, I think that, man, you guys are on the money. It's a convincing argument, and I think the hardest thing for people to accept is, let's take a little of this Eastern spirituality. Let's take the ego away from this. Look,
pull the ego out.
We have to understand, especially if we've been in this industry for some time, we are responsible for the individual's biology that is sitting in front of us. If they are coming to us and paying us money to train them, to work with them, their diet, fitness, whatever, their biology is in your hands. You are solely responsible. I mean, not solely, because they have some responsibility too, but you are responsible as an opinion leader to this individual, no matter who you are, that they trust you with their body. And it's a hard pill to swallow. Maybe the red pill doesn't taste as good as the blue pill, but it's a hard pill to swallow, to go, man, you know what? I've been part of the problem. But I think that is where it's exciting. That's where the most change and growth can occur, not only for your clients, but for you as a coach, as a trainer, whatever your role might be, to say, look, I have been responsible. It takes a whole shit ton more of responsibility to say, I was kind of part of the problem. But it's also powerful to know that now you have the responsibility and know-how to say, but I can still fix this. So maybe I had some role in this, maybe you didn't, whatever, but you can fix this. And that's one of my messages too, is just from like a general fitness standpoint, it's never too late. Like we're very adaptable, no matter, and I've worked with young kids all the way to men and women to their 70s and 80s. it's never too late. Your life is a lot longer than you think it is. Sometimes it doesn't, when we compare our, let's just say a century to the magnitude of time forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a long time, but it's a long time, and it doesn't take that long to fix these things and kind of repattern these things, whether it's strength, whether it's flexibility, whether it's metabolic issues like gaining weight or losing weight, whether it's neurological patterns, athletic patterns, things that are more natural in nature. And that's kind of what I want to finish on, and then maybe finish with some takeaway, what you think would be takeaways or major points from this conversation that people can start with today. And maybe in the future we do part 2, because this has been a fantastic conversation for me. But I want to talk about the emphasis that you guys, like in terms of using nature to kind of describe what's going on, because it seems like the attitude of the human is to somehow elevate themselves beyond the laws of nature, right? Like, regardless of whatever you believe or believe in on a spiritual level, religious level, whatever, it's kind of like an egotistical attitude to go, well, no, we're bigger than nature. We're better than nature, right? Like we exceed these things, but do we? I mean, do we really? And that's something I kind of want you to, you talk about, what is it, the Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, the spirals, the rotation, and even it's, I did a post the other day, actually, funny enough, I forget what they call it, but it's like, they use the slant, the straight line, and the curve, and they roll the ball down. And of course, a lot of people say, well, the fastest point from A to B is a straight line. But in the science, we actually know that the fastest point from A to B is not a straight line. And in nature, lines are man-made. We make lines.
No straight lines.
There's no straight lines, right? So
nature doesn't build in them.
Do you find it? Do you guys just get discredited because it might come off as a little, let's just use, for lack of a better term, a little granola? Like, okay, this is a little like, there's no lines and it's not science and it's curves and it's like the golden blah, 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 blah. Like, what's your guys' general response to that? I mean, because it's like, okay, but
we double down.
That is nature.
Whenever somebody starts to try to poke fun at something like that, we double down on it and we go even harder. Like, cause it's the reality of it. Like, that's the truth. And not even like, we're not the only ones saying this. There's been a lot of smart minds that have said there's no straight lines in nature. They've been saying it for a long time.
The smartest of smart.
The smartest of smart have been saying there's no straight lines in nature. I'm not coming up with that. Everything's curves, everything's arcs, everything's energy moving around a corner. The Fibonacci spiral is playing out at your ankle and hip gyroscope. And the more you can get access to that spiral on the bow, the more power you build. The more access you can get to that spiral on the corner, the more efficient you are on the release. And so the access, and that's why you can look at the Fibonacci spiral and you can see that, oh, it's not just linear. It's not 1 + 1 is 2 + 1 is 3. It's different. It's you're adding this growth that sort of becomes super explosive when it becomes practical. And we definitely want to get people to see nature. And I have no problems, and none of us have any problems with fighting people on that, because we do have that, exactly like you said, this ego that we're above nature. Alan Watts says it. He's like, you dip the paintbrush into the can, you splatter that paint on the wall, and we think we're that dot that's all the way at the top of the paper, separate from the initial blot. Like, we think we're outside of nature, right? That we got outside the food chain. Now we're not linked to nature anymore. And we do this to ourselves in many different arenas, but we definitely do it in the movement world, which is what we're trying to bring people back to. We're saying that, okay, nature doesn't build in any straight lines, but you somehow think that your movement pattern is going to be this piston straight line. Like, where do you come off?
It's pistons, right? It's pistons, right?
It's pistons.
It's all pistons, man.
So it's like, and then once you turn on the tape and you watch the movement and you watch Usain Bolt's ankle and hip, you're like, well, of course, that's the fastest man. Look at that. Like, go watch that. And you say, yeah, it's not a straight line. It's energy moving around a corner, just like all the great storms. And so we definitely, whether, we get picked on for it or not, it's the message that people need to hear. And so whether we could care less what the trolls say, like they can come and say whatever they want and get angry, but I'm more concerned with, it's like almost like, yeah, okay, whatever, dude, let me talk to this person over here that's got my eye contact and they want to hear it because they love it and they know it's true. And they're instinctively trusting, they're trusting that natural instinct that they have inside their body, and they're trusting their eyes. And I tell people, I'm like, you're outsourcing your eyes to academia and the institutions. You're you're saying, no, what I see doesn't count. It only counts that guy in the ivory tower. He has to check it off first. I mean, do you think how crazy that sounds when you say it? And so it's a double down for us. We want people to understand that there's no straight lines in nature. Energy is moving around a corner. Go do the research for yourself. It's all arcs, curves, spirals. That's how energy moves. And we move just like that. And it's in a bow around the corner. And when you don't do that, you're now outside the math. You're not inside the singularity, and you're going to break yourself down slowly but surely over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And because one of the things that really gravitated me towards you specifically, because I've probably had the most interaction with you outside of all the other guys within your team. I saw that you posted in Dope, we're diving a little bit into biotensegrity. And that was one of the things for me that I hope people don't take this. It's almost like dropping acid, right? Or taking mushrooms. Like, it's one of those things where you read about it and you just go, holy shit. Why do people not know about this? Why are we still teaching levers and pistons and, this horrible math that doesn't apply to our body anywhere outside, Earth, essentially. Yeah, exactly. Or death.
Right.
You start to read biotensegrity. And I know that you were diving into a little bit. I mean, how far down the rabbit hole have you gone down with that? Because that's one of the places that I tell people to start. Look, you want me to prove to you that all the Newtonian physics and math that you've been taught is a bunch of bullshit? Just go start diving into biotensegrity. I want you to really understand how your body works, this system of compression and tension, and that there are no lines, that you're it's mind blowing, but it's still over a lot of people's heads. Yeah. But then there's also not a lot of people who have gotten into it yet, or even read about it, or even care to. And I mean, Stephen Levin was the spine surgeon, the guy who kind of made it very, really brought it to, at least biology and into physiology and to how it works within the body. It was already like an engineering concept, and there were artists that use it. But then Stephen Levin that was his aha moment, as he was, I think, staring at a piece of art and going, wait a second, this object is not columns. It's not levers. It's suspended in space. Does the body work like that? And then you really start to go into it. And I think a lot of what you guys teach and practice just align so well. And it only makes sense when you understand both, because that's just the way things are. And again, exercise science, and it's flawed, because basically we took one guy's opinion like thousands of years ago who said, it's just columns and levers. And we just went, okay, sure, man. We trust you. Right. Why question it until, it wasn't even Stephen Levin started, I think, talking about this stuff about 20 years ago. So, but even still, very few people have heard about it. So it's like, I just wanted to kind of get, I guess, your take on, like when you kind of found out about it, did it click with a lot of what you understood now with your observational evidence from the GOATA system and just from your own experience as an athlete, right? Because you have to understand that you had to have this, or people need to understand that you had this awareness that led you to this system. You innately already kind of figured it out yourself. You just were looking for, are there other people out there like, are there other people out there like me, right? Because that's the hardest part, is you always start to feel like a little bit of a weirdo. Like, am I the only one who cares about this? Am I the only one who sees this? But that is the beauty of social media, is you find that, oh no, wait a minute. There's thousands and thousands of other people out there who see this the way I see it. Biotensegrity, dynamic systems theory, these are all things where it's like, there's no lines. There's like, this stuff doesn't exist.
Interesting.
What is your take on that stuff?
Yeah. My first kind of, sort of exposure to it was on Pinterest. And so I started using Pinterest because I'm a big visual learner, obviously.
Yeah.
And so
I would argue that, again, if we look at how shit works, everybody is a visual learner, you know?
Yeah, they really are. Yeah, if they don't know it. But
exactly.
Pinterest was kind of where it started. And so I started looking at the images and I was like, well, yeah, this makes sense. Everything's connected. You know, I was like kind of working off that point of like, okay, nothing's isolated in the universe. Like everything's connected and reflecting each other. It reflects it. And so this idea of biotensegrity was like, oh, everything that's going on in the body is connected. I can't take my arm off and throw it into the corner and not use it. It doesn't work like that. Like everything, and we use the word column, but we say it's a column made up of gyroscopes.
Right.
So this column isn't a load bearing column. It's an energy system where it's going to open and close and it's going to behave in a gyroscope.
It's cycle. A tensegrity structure. I mean, people need to go look at what the people who are watching, listening to this episode. Yeah. You have to do your research. You have to do your homework. Go look up tensegrity structures and biotensegrity structures. And it's another one of those things that when you see it, you can't unsee it and things start to make sense. And you go, holy shit, this is fascinating. It just makes sense. Yes. Columns and levers don't make sense to us. That's why we have to use so much complicated math to figure it out.
Yeah, to try to make it make sense. And that's the big thing is like you're watching a body move through space, right? And you understand that, okay, everything's connected here. And then you see inside that column, that ankle gyroscope isn't behaving the right way. Guess what happens? Everything up that column isn't behaving the right way. Why? Because of biotensegrity. Everything is connected. I can't, and not only that, you go deeper past the movement system, you start to see that, oh, the movement system affects the lymphatic system, it affects the cardiovascular system, it affects all the other systems of the body. And so I have to make sure that I'm treating the movement system the correct way. Because if I start to compress my movement system, I get pushed into the front chain. I start to basically take the body. It's like it's like Russian dolls, a bunch of tubes and everything's interconnected. And now I start to create compression and restriction. And then I don't get flow to certain areas. Yeah. And that's another word that people use a lot, flow and energy and everything being connected. So it's never more apparent than when you're watching slow motion and you're assessing someone and you see that foot not have the tensegrity that it should, not have the behavior that it should. And you're like, oh, wow. Look what that did to everything else upstream. It's all connected. It's all important. And it all starts at the foot. And that big idea of me getting away from this idea of isolation was really the same time that you're walking into the world of nature and you're seeing, oh, everything's connected. Everything's reflecting everything else. That's where the answers are. I got to keep my eyes on that. And then the isolated world, the 90-degree world, the straight line world, it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous looking.
You mean like you mean we don't train at 90-degree angles like Joel Seedman, man? Come on, I'm just gonna go ahead and call him out. Everything's got to be 90 degrees. I thought we knew that. I thought you knew that.
It's insane. And when somebody sent me a video of him particularly training, and I just started laughing out loud because it doesn't even look right. GOATA. It doesn't even look right. It makes no sense. And I'm looking at the GOATA at the same time and the WOTA behavior, and I'm just like, that ain't it, guys. It's not straight lines. Like it just isn't. Yeah. And you got to observe to know that. And you've got to be appreciative of nature. And you got to, like you said, can't have this ego thinking that, well, that's nature. I mean, I've had people, Jeff, that have said,
that's a jaguar. That doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to me. People be like, how do you know what the hunter-gatherers do? They're not around anymore. I'm like, you don't even know that there's still hunter-gatherers on the planet. I'm like, that's how out of tune you are with what's going on in the world. So it's like, there's a lot of things you're battling at once, but that is a big fight, like a general fight, like 90-degree straight line world versus like, we're going to look at nature and see that everything's connected. And I think some people just don't want to go over that fence. They don't want to cross that line. They don't want to get into the natural world. They think it's too, phooey, they say pseudoscience, whatever word
mystic or whatever, right?
Yeah. They'll try to make it like seem dumb when all the real answers are there. Like that's where you should be looking for your answers. Like you said, what's the first, right? What am I doing first in this scientific method? I'm observing the natural world. Well, go look at the natural world. Go watch how nature is playing itself out. Because just go sit out there and observe it. That's going to give you your answers.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting place to be, right? Because, the interesting thing though is, as I tell people who get caught up in research and science and literature and all this stuff, why it usually provides us some clarity on things that we already know, right? Science very rarely tells us anything new. We know these things. And again, like you said, we've observed them. We've observed them over and over and over and over and over again. And then we say, okay, that's science. Like That's essentially, like, in a nutshell, how science works, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
to keep it simple, right?
oh, okay, that's all right, got it.
Okay,
But
let's do that.
I think that's important. I think that's an important message for people to take away is the answer is in simplicity, right? It is very simple. And there's a lot of I made a post about this today as well. It's like there's a lot of vested interest financially
I saw that. Yeah.
for
Yeah,
people
that's great.
to tell you that shit is not simple. When guess what,
Yep.
guys? It's actually really simple. I hate to break it to you, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to confront because I think, again, when ego comes into it, we want to throw up all these reasons why things are the way they are. When at the end of the day, does it really matter? Does it really matter? And we look at in nature and we go, wow, that's how things really should be. That's how things really move. And that was one of the things for me. And I think that people need to understand that trust your observations, trust your eyes. There's a reason you evolved to have two eyes, to be able to observe the world around you. It's a very useful way to understand what the hell is going on and does it look right or does it not look right? And I got to say, people walking with their feet out, kind of walking, they say walk like a duck. It doesn't look right. Aesthetically, it's not pleasing. We go, ooh.
Yep. Spot on.
And then when you see it the other way, you go, wow, that looks nice. It looks graceful. It moves well. It looks good. To me, that must be the answer. But I can't make everyone think like that, right?
That's how I am, though. I'm the same way. Yeah. You look at WOTA and you're like, that's ugly. Doesn't look good. You look at GOATA and you're like, oh, that looks right. It's just natural. It's your natural instinct coming out. Yeah. That's your natural common sense. Skilly uses that word quite a bit. Those two words, common sense, guys. Use your common sense. Think logically here. Trust your eyes. Trust your instincts. It's right there. Like it's literally the answers are right in front of us. People's eyes are down at a book or they're looking up at the ivory tower. They won't look straight ahead at the slow motion video. That's right in front of their eyes.
I made a new friend today. I've never heard it put better than that. People's heads are stuck in the book or they're looking up to this authority to tell them what they should see, what they should do, how they should act, all these different things. I think it takes a lot of integrity to trust your feelings, to trust your observations, and to say, you know what, I hear you, or I read this. It doesn't sit right with me. I'm going to do what feels right, what looks right. And then, because ultimately at the end of the day, you're the one that has to live with that. And so, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. Not to take away from anyone else that I've had on this, but this is, for me, this was good. I knew this was going to be a fantastic going in because the one thing that I look for is to continue learning, right? Like that's what makes us good is to stay open, to stay aware, to keep observing, to keep taking in information. And so how can I make myself better? How can I allow my, thought process to continue? How can I connect new neurons in the brain and get things firing and keep this activity going? Rick, for you, if people could take a few key points away from this conversation, I know we've talked about a lot and I'm sure we could probably continue to talk for hours, which we'll definitely have to do a part 2 in the future, but some key takeaways, some key points that we couldn't hammer enough, we couldn't beat a dead horse enough with, what would they be?
Well, the first one I always tell people is, hey, keep your inside ankle bones high and your heels away all day as you're moving. Like start to make a change in the way you walk, right? Start to make a change in that movement rest cycle. And then you have coaches at your disposal that will help guide you through that, right? If you have questions, get assessed, right? Get assessed so you can have somebody put eyes on you and you yourself can start to see how you move through space so you can start this observation on your own. And that's the kind of the first starting point is get your eyes on it, right? If you're hearing this and you don't really know what we're talking about, go to my page or go to a GOATA coach's page and just start to observe the behavior that we're asking people to look at. You can look at GOATAs, you can look at WOTAs, but start looking at it. And then for your own life, start to change this movement rest cycle, right? Some people feel comfortable working on their own. They're more DIY. I respect that. Other people feel like they need someone to help them. We have different options there inside the system. But I think the big thing is trust your eyes, trust your instincts, go look for yourself at the video evidence, and then start to make a little change in the way that you move. Start with your walk. Just keep your second toe straight. Keep your inside ankle bones high, that bony landmark that you can touch and see. Keep that thing high and then try to get your heel to go away as your foot leaves the ground. That's the first change you want to start to make in your movement. And then when you rest, start to try to get on the ground. Be gentle with yourself to start. Get yourself a support device. Go on Amazon and get yourself a Seiza chair. We have them at GOATA too. But find yourself something to kind of bridge that gap and try to make a little change in your movement rest cycle. That's where I would ask people to start making a move in their own lives. Do it on the movement rest side, and then try to start to observe how movement actually goes down. Use that supercomputer right in front of you to watch Usain Bolt for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, again, I think that's one of the biggest takeaway, guys. You have to trust yourself.
Yep.
You know, we all go to some sort of authority figure at some point, whether it's an authority figure or even a community of people that we kind of look to, you know, validate that what we're seeing is also being seen by others as well.
Yes.
And if it's not, keep looking. And if you find a lot of people that it's not, keep looking. If everybody says it's not, okay. But very rarely are you going to find that. And I think you guys are onto something. You know, I'm no authority figure, but I think you guys are onto something without a doubt. You guys, just from what I see, you guys are helping probably hundreds, if not thousands of people already with your system, which is really, at the end of the day, who can be mad at that, right? If you're taking people out of pain.
We're trying to get people out of pain. That's just fighting this.
I mean, yeah, I mean, shit, I don't care how you do it. If it's getting people out of pain,
right? Not
much you can say about that. You know, I mean, I think that's a great thing. I mean, and anyone who argues against that, it's like, well, where's your interest lie here? I mean, maybe your interest lies in people being in pain, right? So it's a double-edged sword, but because obviously, like, part of my business is also doing that same thing. Is you're in pain. How do we take you out of pain? So you have to have people in pain to take them out. But hopefully the goal is to actually take them out, because unfortunately the way the system is working right now, there's millions more behind them and we can't help them all. Right. So I think that getting your guys' message out there, I've learned a lot in this conversation. Definitely torn down some of my own thoughts and ideas and barriers and just preconceived notions, kind of looking from the outside in and window shopping and seeing how your guys' system works. I don't think that there's any reason, at least, to not do at the very least what you said. And that's just look for yourself, guys. You're going to see what you see based on your own experiences and your own dogma and biases and whatever. But hopefully you can get past that and just, you know, does it apply to you? Does it not? I'm not telling you it shouldn't, but at least look. Why not look? Mm-hmm. Why not pick up the book? You may not just read the first couple pages. If it's not for you, okay, fine. But you know, you're never going to know unless you don't look. So, you know, I think this is great. I think so many people are going to take so much away. And I know people were very excited. You know, I kind of had this weird thing. I was like, am I going to get some like weird kind of reactions from people that I decided to do this with Rick, or are people going to be excited? Yeah. And it was definitely the latter. I had several people message me that were like, man, this is going to be exciting. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. I can't wait to see where this conversation goes. And I think there's plenty more we can take it in the future. And I think we absolutely will. I think this is plenty for people to start with. So Rick, just to kind of close out, where can people find you? How can people find you? Maybe give them some of your information, your Instagram, if you have a website or anything like that. Where can people find you and more information about you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's under Red Pill Rick. And we got, you know, at GLS training facility, that's, I'm pretty sure it's Gary's. And then at GOATA Loco is Coach Gill. And then at Cody_GOATA is Cody, one of the other professors. So you can kind of just poke around on there and you'll kind of see us tagging everybody else. So Instagram's a huge spot. YouTube, I have a YouTube channel. It's got a bunch of videos on there, similar videos to my IGTV. Coach Gilly has a whole GOATA page there. So YouTube's a good spot. We're on Twitter and Facebook too, but I'd say start with Instagram, start with YouTube, kind of search our stuff on there, and then go to the GOATAshop.com or go to GOATAmovement.com or go to coaches.com to find a coach in your area. And pretty much everybody's working remote too. We have a GOATA app that we can work with our clients through to kind of assess and build them regimens. And Gary just came out with a website, and this has an Instagram page to it also, at Recode225, which is going to be, it's basically for the athlete that is looking to train, but they're kind of in this like, okay, I hear you guys that everything's, wrong the way I've been doing it, but what do I do now? And so this website's going to kind of help guide the athlete through this, this world of training to make sure that they can make sure they're doing the right things in there. So start with Instagram, start with YouTube, kind of poke around, take a look at the videos, watch some of the longer deep dives on IGTV or YouTube, and then visit the websites.
Yeah, I think that's plenty of great information. And guys, in case you're wondering, I know I personally have seen the spectrum of different individuals and athletes using your system all the way. I've seen, I think, powerlifters and weightlifters, CrossFit athletes, obviously football, baseball, about all the team sports. I mean, you guys are kind of touching the whole spectrum. So, for those, I just have to preface or kind of end with this, because I know I get a lot of people that come from yoga, weightlifting, powerlifting, etc. Guys, just know that from what it sounds like, from the way he's explained it to me, that there are ways to implement a lot of these strategies into your training if those are modalities that you choose to continue to train. I'm not here to tell you how to do it. Plus, I rather you probably do something than do nothing anyway. And shit, at the end of the day, whatever keeps you happy. But I know pain takes happiness away from a lot of people. Yes. So, if that's one of those things that you're experiencing and you haven't found answers, guys, I recommend that you at least look into it, you reach out. And it seems like there's a happy medium for those who, can't fully detach from their thinking and still want to enjoy, some of these other things. I think there's probably a good way to integrate.
There's a way to do it.
There's a way to do it. It may not be optimal in the way you guys see it, but at the end of the day, do something it's always going to be better than doing nothing. So, I just wanted to say thank you, Rick, so much for coming on. I'm extremely grateful and thankful that you spent a couple hours of your afternoon here with me and talking and chatting. And, I learned so much. I hope everyone listening to this learns a lot as well. And they're willing to kind of open their mind up to this. And just, like I said, at the end of the day, just take a poke. If it's not your jam, awesome. I'm sure you can move on. No one's feelings are going to be hurt. But if you're like most people, you're going to take a look and you're going to at least find that they make some pretty valid points. They make some solid arguments. And the question that I want to leave everybody with today is, if you're sitting in a court of law tomorrow morning and a guy's life is on the line and you see the video evidence, it's put before you and you have to make a decision, what decision are you going to make? And I think that for a lot of people is going to spark enough to say, you know what, I think it is worth taking a look at this, because I have to say it's worth taking a look. And just from taking a look, I've learned a lot of things, and there's a lot that I know I can implement into my own training and with my clients. And I look forward to interacting more and possibly even getting into the system and learning more. So, again, thank you so much. Thank you for spending your time with me. And I look forward to talking again soon.
Yeah, dude, this was great. Thank you, man. I mean, it's huge. Like I said to you the other night, I'm real grateful for this opportunity, because that's what we're trying to do now. Just kind of talk this thing out. We've got enough posts out there. We've got enough information out there. But these types of moments where you can talk for a couple hours is really how you get your questions answered, and it helps people get a better idea of the system, and it sort of gives them something to start with, and then they can go back and look at the video, and it helps them make more sense of it. So once again, I really appreciate you having me on. Super grateful for this. It's really cool. Let's do it again.
Yeah, definitely. So guys, again, go check him out. He gave you all the information. Obviously, you guys know where to find me at The Flexible, www.strengthculture.com. And again, I'm looking forward to speaking again in the future. Thank you so much.